This is Amend and Progress, your go-to podcast from Vidori for all things promotional material review. Get ready for actionable insights, valuable perspectives, and best practices to elevate your workflow and team morale.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Amend and Progress, Vidori's podcast about the material review process. I'm your host, Annalise, and today we're going to be talking about the alignment between brand and medical affairs teams. We're going to be covering what this relationship looks like, collaboration best practices, and considerations for promotional content review. Joining me in the conversation today is Grace Macalino. Grace, welcome to the show. I'm so delighted to have you here today.
Great. So nice to be here, Annalise.
Do you just want to give a couple of sentences or a brief overview about you and your role?
Sure. I'm a scientist, researcher by training, epidemiologist. The work I do is we assist medical affairs and scientific strategy, chief medical officer folks as it relates to all things medical. That's the work we do.
Amazing. And you and I have collaborated on some content related to med affairs in the past. And so I know that we're about to uncover a ton of great insights today. So again, just so delighted to have you on the show.
Oh, so exciting.
Before we get into the meat of the conversation today, let's start with just a couple, hopefully easy getting to know you questions, just to give the folks at home a sense of who you are.
Sounds
okay,
good.
first question. What is your morning beverage of choice?
Morning beverage. So I'm not I have to drink this every day. But when I do, I'm a green tea girl. So I definitely go for sometime iced, sometimes hot. I can definitely tell the seasons are changing when I start moving to, I'll have like an iced green tea. So that's
Gosh.
what I do.
Yes, what a fun feeling to finally
Yes.
want like an iced beverage in the morning. It's a really nice feeling.
It really does sort of signal that like, okay, I think we're getting into spring. Here we go,
Absolutely. It's such a nice milestone.
Mhm.
Okay, second question. What is either your current or favorite hobby?
Favorite hobby. I have to say cooking. It's definitely when I was a poor grad student, the thing that was okay to do when I was studying. And then it's evolved to become the thing that I get to take care of my family with and experiment and, lots and lots of, I've been known to stream lots of, cooking videos and shows and things like that.
How fun. Any signature dishes or things that you particularly love to cook?
Nothing. I am a unique, like some people just love cooking and not baking, and some people just love baking. And I actually kind of straddle both. So I'm kind of
I love
all.
it.
Yeah,
Some
no one
balance.
particular thing. I'm kind of like and I don't even mind, like I can go ethnic, I can go American. So yeah, I love it all.
Amazing. Okay, final question. What is one productivity hack or best practice you use in your daily life?
I try to write down the three big things that if I did today would make a difference. And those usually cut across work and life, just so that I don't kind of like in that quest for work-life balance. Sometimes there's like, okay, if I go before I go to sleep, if I manage these three things, I'm good. And kind of give myself permission to take credit for that in those moments.
Amazing. That has not surprisingly come up quite a bit when I've asked other folks, other guests on the podcast. Everyone, the three things seems to be a pretty consistent best practice that we're all using. So it's just fun to find some commonalities there. Well, thanks for entertaining those questions. It's just a delight to get to know you a bit better. Okay, great.
That's awesome.
All right, let's talk alignment between med affairs and brand. One place I thought we could start is just having you describe this relationship. What does the relationship between these two teams look like?
So, at its best, it's supposed to be very collaborative, right? Medical is foundationally the voice of the patient, really accountable for the scientific rigor of a brand, really relied upon to, remain on label, do the right thing, but then also be able to answer off-label questions when things come up, if providers have questions, right? So I think the relationship is really valuable, particularly as it relates to, building new content and promotional materials, right? When we get brought in sooner rather than later, it's really this nice, like, hey, we get your commitment and what you want folks to learn. And here are some thoughts about how to do that in a rigorous scientific way.
Hmm. Anything in particular about 2024 that is impacting the relationship between these teams, changing it, altering it in any way? What are we seeing in terms of this year's trends that are impacting this relationship?
It's a great question. I think that there's a lot of pull for, hey, where and how can we do things faster? AI, what's going on? Let's be sure that we're being efficient and quick.
Mm,
But there is a real need to make sure that that rigor is still there. So I think there's a bit of a bigger push pull for rigorous content, making sure that claims are really dead on. That there's sort of a appreciation for, gosh, we really need to make sure that we get this right. So I do
mhm,
am feeling and seeing that 2024 is really highlighting the need for that high standard for your content being rigorous, as well as obviously compliant and checking off all the boxes in terms of doing the right thing.
We've heard this as well. This concept of content quality is not novel, but it seems to be
Mm,
coming up a lot this year because of this concept of strapped teams doing more with yet less, yet
yeah.
we need really high quality content. And so, talk to me about what are some things that brand teams can be thinking about from a content quality perspective that helps the medical affair reviewer, once that content gets to promotional content review, help that process go smoothly. What are some of the early activities that help a smooth process?
I think the key word in what you said was early, right? I think it's
Mm,
really bringing on your medical affairs team sooner rather than later, not being concerned that things aren't, all laid out already. Kind of getting medical insight and input sooner rather than later tends to make a big difference. We can support teams to not go too far down in a direction that, they might have to kind of pull back from. If there
sure.
are questions that can be answered sooner rather than later, it can kind of get addressed without, again, so many rounds of MLR review. I think also we've seen, the brands that really have this managed well, with a claims matrix or just kind of laid out from the jump, like, okay, here's what's okay. Like, what are those guardrails that are okay in terms of what you can say, not say, and where we can kind of play safely in, if you will,
Yeah, absolutely. And on the topic of claims, that's a key area, obviously, where these teams are collaborating, but there's some gray area sometimes
Yes.
involved in this, right? What is some advice or like considerations that you think these teams need to take into account when collaborating on content where there is gray area? What do teams need to be aware of?
I think starting from we're all on the same team is
Mm,
goes a really long way, right? That
okay.
there's a commitment to being able to both educate the communities about a brand and really understand that those gray areas are there for a reason, right? It's not so clear, does this fit inside of the label or what the FDA has approved as far as language that we're able to use, so that medical teams are just kind of trying to make sure that we can stand the test of anybody reviewing these things and saying, like, yep, that makes sense, that matches what's in the label, as well as not being a gatekeeper or someone perhaps standing in the way of, we're just trying to be able to get the right product to, we always talk in medical affairs, right? It's getting the right med to the right patient at the right time,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
So
mhm.
I think that's a place to start, right? Because then conversations can really be generative and supportive, as opposed to kind of us versus them type perspective, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's a good place to start, and then really understanding the commitment that, like, okay, well, let me try to understand where and how you're trying to message this, and let's see where we can fit the the language that makes the most sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're sort of starting to hit on some of these concepts that of like working better together, right? Early dialogue, dialogue during the process of creating those claims, talking through those gray areas. What other collaboration best practices would you advise teams to take into consideration, or what have you seen really work in making these two teams being incredibly collaborative and efficient?
So I again, I'll reiterate, I guess, I never
Sure.
think it's too early to bring medical into the planning process, the thoughts
Yeah.
around, like, hey, there's this big campaign we'd like to start that's focused on, deep science or, whatever it is, right? So I think the
Hmm.
early sooner rather than later, bringing that kind of collaborative spirit. And that goes on both ends for sure. I think that brand needs to get it, but so does medical, right? That, we are all here committed to the same thing. Um, Other best practices, I think just being open, right? To,
Hmm.
hey, I get you might have wanted it to look a particular way, but if there's some latitude to kind of like, is there a way to see this done this way so that everyone can win? I think can go a long way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's incredibly important and something that folks can just keep top of mind is that you are working together. There is this common goal, and I think so often that's like a nice mantra to refer back to.
Yeah. And
Let's
I
move
thought of
into,
something else. I
yeah, yeah, go
think
ahead.
too that so many great ideas come inside of this kind of early phase before something like a promotional material has been like really defined, and kind of keeping track of
Mm,
those things for future efforts I've seen to be also really successful, right? So that each
okay.
um, product doesn't, or each promotional material doesn't have to feel like a one-off all the time, right? So that there starts to become a, okay, well, I'm starting to get where they're coming from, and here's how we can kind of build that perspective into our future uh, efforts. I think has also been really, really successful in terms of like, oh, okay, great. Now this can help me define like the next 5 things I want to do, or I can really get a context for the entire year's kind of unfolding. That makes a big difference also.
Incredibly helpful. It's every conversation can be useful, right?
Right.
So
No,
even
very
if you're
much
not
so.
able to execute on that, it's still, wow, that's incredibly helpful. I think just that maximize every opportunity and take those each dialogue as something that could be revisited in the future is really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's move into promotional content review. So we've talked a little bit about maybe collaboration, early concept development, when content gets to review.
Mm-hmm.
What can go wrong from your perspective in terms of where maybe medical affairs or brand teams are bumping heads or there are some challenges?
So, there's always this pull for, we really need this out in the field yesterday, right? So I think there is the, kind of planning ahead and making sure, like, if there are really tight deadlines, that there's things that don't come up as a surprise, right? I think
Mm,
medical can sometimes be seen as the bad guy because, they're holding things up because, oh, we needed this yesterday and it's so important, but if it's the first time someone in medical is seeing something and they just cannot ethically or really stand behind some language or whatever it is, they're kind of stuck between what their role is and their perspective that needs to be included, and this sort of business need to get things out. And sure, there's always the ability to kind of like, hey, let's kind of fast track this, and but I think that does take a toll when that ends up being sort of the pace of everything all the time. Like, okay, but
hmm.
medical also has full-time jobs that aren't include just MLR, right? So I think that
Absolutely.
appreciation or understanding, or perhaps sensitivity to
Hmm.
this is one of many functions that a medical affairs person is required to handle, it is really important.
Hmm. Anything else in terms of maybe we can pivot to more of a positive lens and like what
Yeah.
are some best practices or ways that the collaboration or the review process can go really well? Like what are some things that folks can aspire to do?
So, in addition to be included early, kind of seeing early drafts, understanding like, here's the literature. Sometimes, you'd be surprised how a medical team could get really caught up in just managing references or double checking, like, do the
Hmm.
references match? So, even if a asset isn't complete yet, hey, here are the references I'm using. Here's where and how I'm trying to, uh, you know, um, provide attribution. And so, again, any kind of heads up or a way to make that not just, okay, hey, you have a few days or a week to turn this around, is really valuable, right?
Hmm.
I've also seen, each time you get a new asset, there's like a whole new reference list, and none of it's like, um, I mean, not like it should, but none of it's the same. But sort of, again, that's sort of where that claims matrix claims binder really can make a difference, because then someone isn't having to, double check. Doctors really do go in and check references sometimes, especially in a novel or innovative space. Gosh, I've never heard of that before. They kind of go through and will look up a reference. And, the last thing you want is to have that reference not be either appropriate or the correct one. So, something like that is super really important to medical people. We really are checking, like, do these references really
Yeah.
say what they're supposed to be saying?
Hmm. Maybe this is like obvious, but based on everything you've said, they're not, in some ways, they're distinct teams, but they're really part of one team. And it's almost just like that transitional mindset, I think, like I'm coming to realize in this conversation, like you so often see them as so different, but based on everything you're saying, it's like, no, you're working in lockstep to do what's best for the organization and the product and the brand. And so I think it's just like I'm having this realization that they're not separate teams in some ways. They're the same. Would you agree?
Oh, very much so. And it's so interesting, right? There are regulatory and compliance reasons why medical is supposed to remain independent 100% from commercial, right? I mean, the
Hmm.
whole idea is to have that society can trust that there's a scientific separate entity, right, that's standing for them and not here for you know um to make money or sort of to sell product, right? I mean, that's
Yep.
clear. But I do think that in that separation, we've almost the lines get a little blurry in terms of what should collaboration look like. And where I've
Hmm.
seen successful teams really be productive are where they're able to kind of navigate that as um, collaborators, as partners, kind of moving forward to a common goal. And you can kind of maintain those separate lanes while still really working closely together. But I completely agree with you. Especially in MLR review, if folks can really see that they're all on the same team, it really goes a long way, for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you've talked a little bit about, medical affairs being involved early in content development. I imagine there'd also be some early collaboration when it comes to like the commercial strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about how the brand or commercial teams can think about including Med Affairs in that sort of strategic work stream that then I imagine would help the rest of this run a lot smoother because you are all on the same page. Any comment, insights, considerations on that piece?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen teams work very successfully where medical is included and really has a voice in building that, brand strategy on an annual basis,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
again, when and how they get brought in makes a difference. Are they just sort of told as opposed to kind of included and asked and brought in earlier, sooner rather than later? So 100% that makes a huge difference. Uh, and
Yeah.
right, not just in terms of like what work looks like, but even from hey, I actually feel like I find myself and like I have ownership of that strategy as well, as
Mm.
opposed to, oh, yet
Hmm.
again, I'm just sort of a service provider, or whatever that can end up feeling like if you're not included,
Yep.
right, earlier in the process. So yeah, no,
Yeah,
that makes
absolutely.
a big difference for sure.
Same team, early collaboration,
Yep.
dialogue, understanding one another,
Partnership,
communicating,
communication, yes.
partnership. If we had a word cloud for
I
today's
know,
episode,
I know,
that would be
I know.
those would be some of the words,
And I do
right?
have to say, I
Yeah.
mean, I can imagine that it can be tough, right? Some folks do either have struggled in the past or maybe have gotten burnt in other situations where, gosh, what does that look like? But compliance teams are there to really support like what's okay, what's not okay. And I think again, kind of where and how we can see what might be often seen as a hard wall, as as opposed to that wall being more like a, you know, it's just a barrier that kind of like where and how should the divide really look, right? Because I don't think that it is black and
Hmm.
white or should be so hard and fast. And there's definitely
Hmm.
a compliant, very doing the right thing way to have collaboration be productive and really generative for both sides, right? So that's what I
Yeah,
think is
yeah.
possible for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So as we're approaching the end of the conversation here, I'm curious. Let's say you've got these teams that maybe are working okay together, but there's room for improvement. What would be like a parting thought or one thing you would want these teams to take away from today's conversation?
I would say the ability to find the aligned goal, right? And where and how we've supported teams to do this has oftentimes been almost like alignment sessions where each side can get kind of a little bit more of the other person's perspective, if you will, right? I think a lot
Hmm.
of times
Hmm.
within medical, it's really tough to really understand all of the scientific risk and medical risk considerations that us in medical affairs have. So, being able to share that in a way that's valuable to the brand, I think is really important. And we've definitely had moments of, you can see in people's faces, like an aha moment happens, right? Like, oh, okay, yeah, thank you for kind of doing that for us. And then conversely, right, having medical teams, really get like, oh, okay, yeah, hence the sort of quick timelines and, what your challenges are, and learning, oh, okay, that isn't just you trying to put something on me. Like, there is a bigger thing going on here, right? So I do think, when there are opportunities for real talk, if you will, to sort of say what's going on and kind of translate, what the foundation of where we're coming from it can be shared, I think really, you know, can transform things, So I think that's what
I
I'm
love
saying.
it. I love it. What a perfect way to end the conversation
Oh,
today.
thanks.
Open dialogue, know where you all are coming from. I love the real talk concept. It's such like a colloquial thing that applies here. So
I know.
a perfect way to end the to end the conversation. Grace, thank you so much for coming on. Just so appreciate your time and your perspective on the conversation today.
Wonderful. Thanks for inviting me, Annalise. Great. Take care.
Thanks. And folks, the conversation doesn't stop here. Follow Vidori on LinkedIn for updates on new episodes. Ask us questions. If there is something you want us to cover on the podcast, we would love to hear from you. You can subscribe to Amend and Progress on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review the show. Until next time, this is Annalise signing off from Amend and Progress. Have a fantastic day.